Welcome back to the county seat. We are talking about archaeology and the problems we have with curating and protecting archaeological resources across the state. Joining us for our conversation part of the show today is Shawn Lambert, who is the public archaeologist for the state of Utah, and Nathan Thomas, the lead archaeologist for the Bureau of Land Management. Thank you both for taking the time to come and talk with us.
Fantastic to be here.
So I want to kind of start with, you know, the issue that got us all together here was vandalism and looting, and the problem of protecting archaeological history, and it's apparently been widespread. But I want to focus a little bit to start the conversation on vandalism. Is all vandalism or most vandalism that takes place intentional?
No, I would say that over 90% of the vandalism is probably not intentional. They're probably doing something that they are not stepping on a site, maybe inscribing their name on a rock face that may have rock art that they can't see. So a lot of what they're doing...
Well, that would still be vandalism.
It's still vandalism, but they are unaware they may be doing or defacing an archaeological resource. So
if somebody walks into one of these Chinese campsites from on the railroad grade, I picked that because in our other show we were just out there recently, and you see a shard of porcelain, you pick it up, you look at it, you put it back. Have you just messed up history?
No, I would say I mean, to be very strict, the law says anyone who excavates, illegally collects, damages, or destroys archaeological resources, that's against the law. Mm-hmm. But, you know, just looking at the artifact, picking it up, and placing it right back down where you found it, that's not illegal. But archaeologists are really sensitive. They want to know exactly where that artifact came from. So for me as an archaeologist, it's really important that archaeology artifacts stay in the same place. If the artifact is on this side of the table versus that side of the table, that's a big difference for us.
Say for instance, if they picked that artifact up in one room of a Pueblo house and they moved it 20 feet and it's in another section of that Pueblo house or another site, it totally loses its context and provenience. So as archaeologists, it would totally disrupt how we see what was going on in the past, what people were doing in specific areas of that site.
So basically going, how did the dinner plate get in the bathroom?
Exactly, yeah. It would maybe cause some questions or some interesting interpretations that would not have been there if they had moved it.
So for people who enjoy and explore the outdoors, this puts a large onus on them to be careful when they come across something. And you made a point of picking it up, putting it right back. You're saying putting it right back in the place that it is. Should people be afraid to look at something that they discover?
I don't think they should be afraid. I mean, I use that example because that's the most important rule in archaeology. It's the same in real estate, which is location, location, location. So that's pretty important to us for telling that story. But no, I think as people learn a little bit more about archaeology, they learn about how to respect it, and they can come into areas and you know, not touch the rock art, not take artifacts home, just be careful where you walk. Yeah, I think that they can come in and enjoy. I mean, Utah is a great state. I mean, there's just amazing history here, amazing archaeology, and I love it.
Yeah, go ahead. And I was going to say, and just to add to what Nate said, feel free also to take photos. If you're curious about what you picked up and you placed it back down, take a few photos, send it to the State History Office or to the BLM archaeologist, and we can help you in interpreting what you found. So
I mean, if I'm out hiking and I come across an area and I go, oh wow, look, there was a camp here 100 years ago. I'm thinking recently of a trip we made out south of Vernal, and we came across some old mining campsites, and they were untouched. We were way out there, and I was like, wow, this is really cool. If I took a picture and send it to you, you'd go, where did you see that? Where did you find that? You know, or would you just say, oh, this is an interesting, you know, this is a period of history that, I mean, do you like that kind of input from people?
Definitely. I think there are specific apps that are being created in Utah now, like Friends of the Cedar Mesa and others, where they'll be able to download this app, and then the public actually be able to take pictures and become stewards of where they live around them. And they will take pictures, send it back, and then they'll help us document new sites or redocument old sites that we've surveyed 50, 60 years ago. So we can engage with the public so that they can help us preserve those sites.
So I want to talk about the context of archaeology too, because I just mentioned an old miner's camp. Is Swayze's cabin any less archaeology than, say, Defiance House?
Do you wanna jump in on this? You go first, and I'll.
Well, no, I would say that one material culture is not more important or has less research value than another material culture. So, if you found a historic can in one cabin, and you walk around and you find a 12,000-year-old Clovis point, those to archaeologists do not have any less value to them. We look at them the same. If they're older than 50 years, then we deem them as an artifact, and they both have research value. But to the public, they may seem different because of the age of those artifacts, and that's something that archaeologists can come in and talk to the public and say that these artifacts, and no matter when they were found or when they were made or when they were produced, but they have a story behind them. The specific people manufactured them, specific people used them and reused them and then passed them down. And then as archaeologists, we can reconstruct that rich narrative. And if we give those narratives to the public, and I think that's the point at which we can connect with the public and get them interested in the wonderful history that Utah has. It's about 13,000 years of history in Utah.
Yeah. My first experience in historical archaeology happened when I was a Boy Scout. Our scoutmaster took us up to the Park City mines, where we got to see, the mine shafts and the mines themselves. And as a 11-year-old boy, I thought that was just awesome, to hear all the historic stories and the folklore behind mining. It's really neat. And as I have, progressed in education and understanding of archaeology in Utah, I'm in love with all of it. There's from the Pueblo sites in the southeast corner of the state to the railroad sites that we visited together. One's not more valuable than the other. It's just depending on kind of who's looking at it and the lens they're looking at, which is a good point, because we need to be respectful of the prehistoric sites and the historic sites.
So one of the things that has been expressed as a concern to me from people who are responsible for curating a lot of information is that somebody will permit to go out, a college or university, to do a dig, and they'll go on a site and they'll start collecting data and they'll start gathering it in boxes, and it'll go back and it'll sit in the university and the professor teaching a class, and he's probably interrupted by Indiana Jones a few times, and he gets back to it, and then he gets old and he dies, and all his stuff is in boxes, and his widow ends up with it. She doesn't know what to do with it, and then it tries to go back to a university, and then they have the problem of trying to put this legally acquired archaeology back into context. And apparently, the Utah Museum of Natural History is just backlogged with thousands of hours of work just to get caught up. Yeah. How do you solve that problem? I mean, and how destructive is that to our full understanding of history?
Well, I guess one way I like to look at it, well, first off, the folks in the Natural History Museum do a fantastic job. And when you excavate an archaeological site, you're actually destroying the archaeological site. And you're scientifically destroying it. And to scientifically destroy it, you're collecting soil samples, which can be, very bulky. You're collecting all the artifacts, and you're carefully boxing them up so that they can be in that museum and be there in perpetuity. And it is a problem when there is, that situation that you've talked about, of how there can be boxes of artifacts that are discovered in a closet back east of materials from Utah. And I think we're just kind of scratching the surface of that. We're doing what we can to make sure that those things don't happen again with our permitting process and bonding of excavations.
So people actually have to put up the money in advance now, like a university or a foundation or the Smithsonian, whoever it is. Does the BLM make the Smithsonian perform to the same standards of bonding that they do, Billings, Montana College or whatever?
No, I guess I better be clear. So university excavations, they have a permit, and that permit says that they're responsible of paying for the curation. It's when a utility company comes in and needs to put in a utility line and damages an archaeological site, they're responsible for paying for that.
Okay, so, but then if a university only gets a permit and this stuff goes sideways and it ends up in a box in England, which I think is how the entire Antiquities Act started, if I'm not mistaken, is that some guy from England was raiding all these Anasazi artifacts, and they wanted to try and find a way to stop that from ending up in British museums. So, how do you solve that problem? Because you still have a lot of uncurated materials that are sitting out there.
Yeah, well, I guess the Antiquities Act, it did have some of its roots here in Utah, and I think sometimes people forget that's the Antiquities Act, written in 1906, was for that purpose, to protect archaeological sites. I guess moving forward, we're taking it bit by bit. I think as we as an agency in the BLM, when we hear those situations and those collections are from BLM lands, we're working with those universities to find funding so that they're properly curated.
I think when you compare the archaeological work that's been done maybe during the WPA era in the late 1930s, early 1940s, and compare it to the rigorous digital databases that we have and that we have control of, I mean, we're seeing a lot less of the misuse and of these cultural resources, and that it's harder and harder to misplace these items as time goes on. So we're inventing new ways to make sure that we never lose that context or provenience of those artifacts.
And we're doing more digital, more scanning.
Exactly, and a lot more non-destructive archaeology with drones, with satellites now, with 3D technology, 3D modeling, 3D printing. So we're doing a lot of things now that we don't even have to, as GPR, so ground penetrating radar, that we can see what's going on under the ground without even having to dig anymore. So we're doing a lot that we're impacting the ground a lot less now these days. So
here's a question, and I know this has come up particularly with some of the Native American cultures. They want their stuff back. And the Antiquities Act and some of the subsequent acts say, okay, we're going to collect this material, and it's going to be done by permit. It's only going to be done by people who are authorized to do it. We're going to curate it, and it's going to stay in a museum. And that museum may be on the Delaware River, and they've got the Shawnees, that they've got that history back there, but they've got Puebloan artifacts back east, and people want them back out west. What effort are we making to try and keep those valuable pieces of history closer to the local communities where they come from?
So right now, when we have an archaeology firm or a university come into the state of Utah, they get a curation agreement, and we're requiring that that curation agreement is within a university here in the state. And so, and I should say there may be a few exceptions, a few universities that are just outside of Utah, but on a whole, those institutions are curating within the state. Another thing that we do is before we do we permit any sort of excavation, we require tribal consultation. So we require the field office to go out and speak with the tribes and let them know that this excavation is occurring and solicit their input.
And are more and more of them saying, well, you can excavate and what you learn, but we want the pottery back?
Well, I guess, Shawn, you have any thoughts on that?
So I worked in Oklahoma for 7 years in the public archaeology sector when I was finishing my PhD, and I worked with 26 of the 39 federally recognized tribes in Oklahoma. And what I've learned is when you do tribal consultation, you just need to ask questions, and they'll tell you if they're interested or not in wanting these materials back, and then that repatriation process can start after that. As archaeologists, it gets harder to understand cultural affiliation the older it gets. So if we have maybe an archaic or a paleo site, it's really hard for us to know which tribe that are living today has ownership of that. So we do our due diligence and try to contact as many Native American tribes as possible.
I would imagine that if you had a Fremont dig, there could be 3 or 4 different tribes that are listing today.
Yes.
Those are ours. No, those are ours. No, those belong to us.
And they have really strong ties to those artifacts, for sure. But I want to point out, though, that if there are artifacts that are found on public lands, like BLM-administered public lands, those are artifacts that belong to the American public, and that's the BLM's responsibility to manage those artifacts. So it's only when we have situations that are associated with human remains. And so if there's human remains, associated funerary objects that are found with the grave, that's when we bring in the tribes, and we try to do that cultural affiliation. But artifacts of themselves outside of a grave context are public resources.
Okay, excellent. Anything we missed?
I don't think so.
Well, stay with us. We'll be back with the county seat. When we come back, we're actually going to go out on a dig and see how much care goes into dissecting history. We'll be back with the county seat in just a minute.